So this morning our first guest is Paul Paynter. And Paul, good morning, Paul. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning.
Hi. Sorry about that. We've got a new producer and me back on the mic. And when you're 62 in a studio with lots of digital stuff, sometimes things don't quite go to plan. Look, thanks very much for coming on this morning, Paul. Now, you are the principal of a company called the Yummy Fruit Company?
Yeah, that's right.
In the Hawke's Bay.
Mm-hmm. We're a pretty substantial family business. People will know our sort of Yummy brand on the shelves of New Zealand supermarkets, where we sell the majority of our fruit.
Absolutely. It's iconic, isn't it?
Well, I hope so.
I've certainly seen it around quite a lot. Very nice product. But Paul, I've been talking to a couple of my mates just in the last 24 hours who've sort of given me a bit of a feel for where things are at. So from your perspective, what's gone right with the response so far from the government, and what are you most worried about now?
Your summary was excellent. The first response of, we've got properties covered in silt, they can't harvest their crop, they're all in a bit of a mess, let's give them some money to clean up. So that decision, quickly and imperfectly, was absolutely right. And so it did take us 7 weeks to get any money, but most people got it more quickly than that. And the smaller and more straightforward your business, the faster you got the money. So I know many small operators that asked one day, got it the next. So that's great. So that initial assistance for the clean-up, which is not enough to do the job, but helpful, it came quickly. But now there's this period of time, and you're absolutely right. I'll paint a picture for you. There's some people I know, they've obviously borrowed seasonal finance from the bank to produce their crop. It's been wiped out. Their orchard's been wiped out. They're living in the garage with a generator and a barbecue. The power's still off, and they've got a portaloo outside, and they're waiting. And they've got no money because they owe the bank a couple of $100,000 that they've spent of their money, and they've got no crop, and they've got no asset. So they wake up every day and they potter around with wheelbarrows and shovels tidying up a bit, but they've got absolutely no idea what their future is. And it's not just those small people. I spoke to a really big player a few weeks ago, and I said, I don't think the government's going to give too much money to you millionaires. And he said, Paul, they will, because if they don't, we'll all go broke. And that's basically it. He's probably in hock tens of millions of dollars to the bank, and most of his crop is gone. Yeah. So people are financially destitute, and they don't know what decisions to make. When they wake up every day, they're going, I owe the bank a lot of money. Any money I spend today is the bank's money. The banks are not very happy because they're looking at the earnings of their customers being destroyed, the asset value. They're worried about their security. Got an orchard that's covered in silt and the trees are dead. What's it worth? If you tried to sell an orchard to anyone in Hawke's Bay today, I don't know what you'd get. Nobody knows what they're worth. So the bank's really worried about that as well. So we're all a little bit financially crippled, very worried about the future, and have no sense of direction about what comes next.
And so in terms of the government interaction with the growers, I was actually fortunate enough to be at a conference where, is it Nicole Tunley, the head of Hort New Zealand, CEO?
Nadine, yeah.
Yeah, Nadine was speaking, and she echoed some very similar comments to you, that there are some real concerns about what next as well. So what is the interaction, like I suspect there's still interaction with the likes of Hort New Zealand, but what stuff is actually happening on the ground as well, or isn't there, whether you're having meetings with government officials to try and work through some stuff? How are you advocating for that?
Well, every news story says the recovery is going well in Hawke's Bay. There is no recovery, just a bit of a clean-up, and that's imperfect at best. But basically, all of the industry organisations, and I think this is symptomatic of industry organisations everywhere, they're in the back room trying to do a deal, I think. They tell me they are, but there's nothing happening out in the public domain. And the important thing in terms of industry advocacy is you have to engage in the democratic process and the political process of saying, in the public domain, government, here's the crisis we've got, this is what we need, and we need your help. And the Fourth Estate have a big role to play there to explain that to the public, because it's a matter of public interest. And then they have a look at it, and a voter in Herne Bay looks at the government and goes, sounds fair enough, government, what you're going to do. So that discussion that happens in the public domain is how democracy works, is how governments work. But we seem to have all reverted to sort of the corporate style, keep it below the parapets, have a chat in the back room and come up with a deal. But in growerland, got no idea what progress is being made, no idea what that deal is, and no idea how well I'm being represented by my industry. They tell me they're doing a great job, can't see it.
Right. So in terms of like this, so you're not seeing, well, Stuart Nash has probably got his head down below the parapet, well below the parapet at the moment, but your local MPs, anywhere to be seen?
Not really. They're sort of in campaign mode. Obviously, Stuart's not going to stand, and then Anna Lork, who won on the wave of Jacinda Mania last time, is really standing in a blue seat, so she'll be working hard to get votes. But, you know, they're sympathetic, they understand, but I'm not sure what level of advocacy we're getting from them either.
So if you haven't got next steps and you're not planning, what's your prophecy in terms of what's going to happen next?
Well, it's very straightforward in my business. We've finished the apple season harvest in about 2 weeks, and most people are packing for export for maybe a couple of months after that. But over that period of time, people are going to lay off all of their seasonal staff with the normal activity. But because they're all facing monumental losses, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars washed down the river here, they're going to have to cut deep. And really a lot of them will be giving their staff over the next few weeks a letter saying, I'm sorry, we can't continue to employ you. We're going to have a little restructure.
Yeah,
and they'll cut to the bone. So I think there'll be a big spike in unemployment, and the social impacts of that are huge, as well as the organisational impacts. I mean, you've had people here who have been with you through this season of trauma, slogging it out in the sludge, doing hideous clean-up jobs and trying to make the best of a disaster zone. So it's been really rough. And then you'll turn around to them and say, thanks for coming. We really do appreciate it, but you've got no job. So that's going to be terrible for morale and terrible for our community, and that's the problem, is government took a good game on mental health, but those people living in their garage with no plan and no idea of what might happen, their relationship deteriorates by the day, as does their mental health.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen that in Christchurch too, and I don't think you have to live through it and be on the ground to actually understand what the impact of that total disruption. But people need hope. And so what you're saying, with a lack of information, they're losing hope. And
absolutely.
And in terms of mental health, is there any support systems that are reasonably easy to access up there?
There are quite a few. There's been lots of messages go around about how people seek help. Rural people are not very good about talking about these things and seeking help. They tend to be
they're not used to it.
More introverted. They're not used to it, no, and they battle away. And so most of them at the moment are suffering in silence. But I think the best solution for mental health issues is hope. If people can see a light at the end of the tunnel, and they're no longer in blackness, they can move towards the light with some degree of confidence. And hope is a really important thing. You give them some sort of pathway, then I think you'll lift people's spirits and you'll get them back toiling towards that outcome.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because it's almost a game of two halves, because I've got a friend who's coming on later on in the show to talk about Napier and what they want tourists back, because Napier's, as a city, has been not largely unaffected, but has sort of bounced back. And so now they want their tourists back. So selling the message saying, come here, everything's a hunky-dory, is counter to the hinterland and things are not good here. And that's going to be a very hard balancing act to get the right messages out to the right people, because they're going to assume if you've got really cool deals to go and have a romantic weekend in Napier, then everything else must be okay.
Well, the cities are okay. You're right. They're largely untouched. It's really been mostly the rural areas and the farmland that's been hammered, and that's quite a different scenario to, say, Christchurch. But people can come to the city and do all the normal things they do, visit wineries and go out to dinner and enjoy the great weather, and they'll barely notice until they have a drive around the countryside. But some of those drives quite staggering, and there are still there's lots of silt around, lots of wrecked cars, lots of trees, lots of orchards. I mean, I will send you some photos, but I've got pictures of orchards. You won't believe they're orchards. They're unrecognisable.
I have to declare an interest, Paul. We've got my partner's got a share in an orchard up in the Dartmoor.
You know all about it. The Dartmoor
I wouldn't say we know all
horrendous.
about it because we haven't actually got there to have a look yet, because there was no sense to go up there in the middle of everything and do anything. And I think it's one of the orchards that's probably been least affected.
Yeah. That's lucky.
Yeah, it's been
Dartmoor
reasonably
has been
lucky.
very badly.
Yes.
Yeah, the Dartmoor's been smashed. Risington, Puketapu, Esk Valley.
Yep.
We've got about 45 hectares in the Esk Valley, and in some places we've got 3 metres of silt. You can't even see the trees.
Yeah.
So it's probably the biggest natural disaster. I would argue that perhaps New Zealand's ever seen. It really is really far-reaching, right up into the hill countries. Farmers that have lost 20 or 30% of their pasture and all their fences. Their bridges are washed out. So it's very difficult to operate, and the road to recovery will be long and painful, but we just need to know how that might be brokered. And I think there's some need for some grants to help people get back on their feet financially. But beyond that, the best strategy is some sort of perhaps government loan, a Gabrielle bond, where they issue it and lend the money to the growers for 20 years and say, we'll pick up the interest for the first 3 or 4, and you carry the can on the rest of it. And that way you can re-establish. At the moment, the banks are looking at their wounded customers and they're going, great, we're really supportive of you guys, but nobody's going to plant a tree because they've got no money, and the banks will not lend them money to plant a tree. It's just more risk.
And you're right,
debt's
it's so
the
uncertain
same.
because you don't know what the level of investment people are going to make in them anyway, because no one really knows what the value of a apple orchard is right at the moment, or any orchard.
Well, the land's worth, say, 160,000, and the improvements in a modern apple orchard are worth another 160,000. So above the ground's worth the same as the ground. So it's a lot of investment to make, and the banks are looking at these businesses saying the debt's the same as it was 2 months ago, but your earnings are stuffed for quite a few years here, and for us it's about 25% of our earnings are destroyed.
Yeah.
They'll say the debt's the same, so we don't really want to lend you to plant new trees because it's probably at least 4 years once you get the trees. Take a couple of years to get those. So you're probably the balance of this decade, with a very bad earnings situation where you might be losing money, or really, it takes a while to get these orchards back going and into positive cash flow. So they'll say, we actually think the immediate problem here is the debt. Yeah, it would be nice if we could just reduce the debt. And you say, well, how do I do that? And they say, well, you inject more capital or you sell some assets. I'm going, well, both of those are a bit tricky when you're down on your benders.
Yes, and the packing house facilities too. Did many of them get clobbered, or are they pretty much okay?
Oh, well, natural events are hugely unjust. And so, as they were in Christchurch, so you've got 2 or 3 pack houses that are absolutely destroyed, and you've got many that haven't really been touched. So mostly the impacts are in the growing areas, but certainly there's a couple of pack houses. There's a brand new one that's worth some $30 million, which I understand is a complete write-off. It's start again.
Wow.
But the growers have probably lost more than half of their orchards as well, so they probably won't rebuild because they don't have the fruit to pack. But these are the sort of situations, individual by individual, that need to be looked at and say, how are we going to help this recover? We were a rock star for most of the last 10 years, and then we've had...
And that's it. I mean, you were sort of like, there was kiwi fruit and then there was apples, and suddenly apples were the thing. And we've got investments in both kiwi fruit and apples. So it's just like, wow, that's just such a bloody body blow, really, to an industry that has so much potential for the future and was so innovative. I mean, I don't think people really understand some of the science and technology that had gone into producing some of these extraordinary apples that were designed specifically for certain markets in terms of sugar and length on the shelf and all that sort of stuff. It's a hell of a story.
Yeah, no, we've done a great job. Haven't told the story well, but it is very exciting. And the long-term story for food exports to Asia, absolutely compelling. There's no doubt the dynamics there are right, and New Zealand's well placed to supply that and prosper from that. But yeah, right now, we've had so much economic destruction that, that's all in the back burner for now. We need some way of getting back on our feet so that we can take advantage of the opportunity 10 years hence.
And you also need the roadmap, which is the one thing in Christchurch, which was the reset that we did and the 100-day blueprint process of what we're going to do for the central city and the red zone process. That's the thing I think this government is missing, is where's the timeline? Like, if you knew that they've got the next 3 weeks and they're going to make a decision on something, then you go, oh, cool, we've got a bit of progress, so we can do this until that point. But if you're not even getting a roadmap for decision making, it's just going to leave you in this big horrible void.
Yeah, exactly, and it needs to be a little bit ready, fire, aim. The government can say we're going to do this or do some of that, and we definitely won't do this.
Yes.
And they need to give some certainty on what they can and allow, as they did during COVID, where they moved very quickly, the implementation of their policies can kind of evolve as we go on, because they won't be perfect on day one. And I think in the back room they're trying to put out the master plan that they roll out, and it's perfect. Well, it won't be.
No, only 80-20 in this sort of situation. You'll get 80-20, 80% of it right. And trying to get the perfect solutions straight, it's just stupid.
No, and we need action now, some decisions that we know are right, a pathway for the rest of it, and we'll roll with the punches. We understand it's a very ambiguous situation and there is no perfect solution, but we need some sort of idea where we're heading.
Yeah, and another issue that I was speaking to someone yesterday too is the issue around red zone properties and the void that people are in because they don't know what happens, and insurance companies won't pay out until the government makes decisions. So that's leaving people in limbo as well. And so I think that's another thing they need to address pretty quickly. Yeah,
there's this situation, I think, where they declare a national disaster zone or something in some locations, and then it becomes an EQC issue rather than the insurers. And so there's all sorts of debate about that now. And of course, where the stop banks failed, people are also arguing, well, this wasn't a natural disaster, this was an infrastructure failure caused by stop bank maintenance or the slash or the government policy with regard to the slash. So the insurance companies are going to look to pin the tail on the donkey here and make somebody accountable. So there's bound to be a whole lot of litigation that follows this, because there's no doubt the slash and all the other debris, and there was lots of other stuff, came down the river and acted like a series of rolling dams, and they built up on each bridge and then they destroyed it. And then there was a wave of this stuff that arrived at the next bridge, built up there and destroyed that. So it was hideous, and it is fair to say that I think if we'd had a more effective policy for dealing with slash, that we might have got away with this. The problem wasn't the amount of water, it was the fact that the water couldn't make its way along the river because there was too much in its path. Yeah. So those dams caused a lot of the issues, and I think that...
and kill people, basically.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, it killed people, but I don't know who's responsible for that, and it's not perfect. There wasn't 100% the slashes, a few willow trees from the local farmer and all sorts of nice riparian strips that have been planted with the best of intentions. So, but insurance companies will look to allocate blame because they're picking up hundreds of $millions worth of insurance claims, but the biological assets, the trees and the orchards, aren't insurable. So that's the thing that is going to cost the most money. We've probably lost between $15 and $20 million worth of assets. That'll be the cost to replace it. Well, we don't have that. Basically, we're absolutely broke if that's the pathway we have to go down, because we haven't got that sort of money lying around.
Yeah. Oh wow. It's not a good situation, Paul, and I just think that it needs some daylight. If you had a message to Chippy right at the moment, what would it be?
Oh, call it quickly, because the heads are dropping, people are despairing, and they need some clarity about the future. And so don't worry about getting it perfect, just call it.
Sounds good to me, Paul. Hey, look, thanks, and you enjoy your week. If there's any other issues that arise that you think we can shed some daylight on, just give us a ring, and we'll get stuck into them. And best wishes to all those people in those valleys on the western side of Napier. That's the Dartmoor, Esk, Puketapu, Rismore, is it? And
Rivington,
yes. So,
Rivington,
yep, Rivington. So anyone in those areas, here's a shout out. All we can do here in a place like this is keep the daylight on the issue and urge the government and the policymakers to get their act together pretty quick and at least give the framework for some decision making and a plan for the future, so people have some degree of certainty. There is absolutely nothing more taxing and corrosive than living in a situation where you have no idea what's happening next. So thank you very much for your time, Paul. You have a good day.